Alright guys, that's Kremp again. I hope you're doing good and enjoying your day so far. Shotzzy reveals all as to what happened over the last couple of seasons at OpTic Texas, certainly after the rumours of yesterday that Hex was pretty keen to sign Scrappy and HyDra into the team even after winning the World Championship last year. Shotzzy says he was also open to the idea. Dashy said no, therefore the team decided to stick together, but Shotzzy was open to it last year after winning champs. You gotta wonder what that could mean for the coming weeks. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. I wanted to start here. There's a $23,500, maybe Canadian dollar, but you know, whatever, prize pool tournament happening in August. So if you guys aren't familiar with this, Bell Esports Challenge, Toronto did another great job here putting on another tournament, because before the World Championship they ran a tourney which kept us entertained one weekend before, then there was champs out in Kitchener, then there's another one that they're putting together as well. So cool to see this, because of course in a couple of weeks time the season will officially be over, the World Cup will have concluded, and it will be Rostermania, and then it will be a couple of months of, well, we'll see, some off-season tournaments, K-Sun, Hitch. I'm sure there'll be some things going on, as there usually is. And the team's preparing for the new game of Black Ops 7 when that's going to come out, and then the season gets back underway. You guys know how it is. But it's always good to see more things going on, and there's a LAN championship at the Fan Expo Canada on the 22nd of August. So to qualify for this, there were 2 online qualifiers. One happened a few days ago, and one happened concluded yesterday. And the conclusion was as follows. So it did require, I think, some Canadian representation of the teams, and that's why we'll see what we're going to see here in a second. But yeah, Illy's and his boys are playing in this, and Neum, who I think Neum's actually going to be out there at the World Cup, because after some recent drama, basically LAG mates, they blew it up. Well, they didn't blow it up because they could only make one change. Shout out Ravens for trying to get around that one. That didn't work out very well for them. But Gentlemates obviously would make more than one change if they could, but the rules said no, you can make only one move going into the World Cup. A minor roster change is what they considered it, and that's what a number of the teams have done. They brought in DiamondCon for FeLo, and of course DiamondCon was on the Team War team that already qualified for the World Cup. They needed a player, Neum stepping in there instead. But Neum and Illy, they went 28 and 14, whatever, this map of Search on the dealership to take a lead, and eventually they qualified. So he's going to be out there in Toronto with these guys for that tournament, and these are the teams that qualified for it. So Royalty, Exotic, Assault and Noisy, so Royalty and Exotic both Canadian, so you know, that's a pretty nice team. And then the Omit, a couple of Omit teams qualified as always, Illy's team, and then the Omit team is different, right? Because Mamba, Craze, Mac and Vivid, that's the team before that's been dominating challenges recently. They're going to go out to the World Cup with, who knows, maybe a decent chance to do some damage, but I imagine they couldn't play with that team, so they needed a couple of Canadian players. So a Seam and Gunless came in and they qualified. So anyway, those are the teams that will be competing out there in a few weeks' time. But I wanted to get back into this drama because yesterday we talked about it in quite some depth. Hitch revealing on the podcast, JP talking about it, that after OpTic won champs in 2024, HyDra and Scrap were on the market. Pretty rare that players of that caliber were both on the market at the same time. There were a couple of teams looking to capitalize on it. Obviously Falcons, they came in, but they came in with the Saudi strategy, and that was maybe not their long-term goal, long-term vision, but understandably maybe year one, that's what they went for early doors. Gentlemates were coming in, they were trying to make a play. They nearly got Scrap and HyDra to their team instead. That would have, I mean, changed the path of history in many respects, because if Scrap and HyDra did go to Gentlemates, the questions were about how well is that team going to be managed, and as well as we know, maybe not especially well, but HyDra understandably very tempted to play for a French organisation that had loads of money to throw around, it seems, at least at the time. Maybe that's still the case. We'll see what Gentlemates do in this off-season. Maybe they could again be a pretty key player. But in the end, Thieves made sense. They brought Envoy over as well. Ghosty stayed. The rest is history. They were the #1 team in the regular standings this season. They won 2 events. But of course, when it mattered at the World Championship, they bombed out hard and fell into last place. OpTic could have had those guys. That's what Hitch said yesterday. He even said that Hex wanted it to happen. He was very keen to what you might call pack-a-punch, right? This is what Hex often talks about, that when given the opportunity, you always pack-a-punch, right? Now, of course, the question is, yeah, I like that logic on paper. If you have the opportunity to pack a punch, you do it. But of course, you've got to define what actually is a pack-a-punch. If you're sure that it's going to be an upgrade, then yeah, it makes sense to do it, maybe even regardless of the circumstances. But is it necessarily an upgrade? That's what we're going to discuss with this whole Simp and Huke discussion, which continues to happen over the last 48 hours or so, especially since this came out that Hex was keen to get Scrap and HyDra. That didn't happen because, as Shotzzy describes, the team was pretty split and torn on what they wanted to do. And at the end of the day, there would have been serious money involved getting those guys in. Would it have been worth it? It's an interesting question, because during the regular season you would have absolutely said yes, it would have been worth it, given that OpTic was struggling heavily, but after Champs, all of a sudden, the game has changed to some degree. So there was lots of reaction to this, and understandably so. HyDra, Scrap, Envoy, Ghosty eventually became that Thieves team. It was talked about back in September last year, really, when all of this was starting to get finalised, and Thieves had got it seemingly locked in. That became the roster. We know what happened since then, and it would have been an incredibly scary team of 4. I know this is a slightly different team, but there was this tournament that Zuma put on last year, a $5,000 tournament during the Modern Warfare 3 season, and a team that was playing in this was Scrap, Shotzzy, Pred and HyDra, and yeah, they won this tournament kind of at a canter. It's difficult to imagine that Scrap, HyDra, Shotzzy and Dashy wouldn't have won rather a lot the most recent season. Obviously, it would have changed the tides as well for Thieves. And it's also another conversation when it comes to this Simp discussion, is that, well, if you have the opportunity to get a player of that caliber, you also prevent another team having said player. And that's the thing with, you know, Scrap and HyDra. Had OpTic signed them, yes, that would have made them a super team, but also what would Thieves have done? Where would they have gone? What players could they have even signed? I mean, they probably would have signed the players that OpTic released, right? And then it would have gone from there. But, you know, would that have been as strong as what they have with Scrap and HyDra arguably this season being the #1 SMG and AR combo, well, definitely combo, but even individual players in the entire game? That's another consideration, that if you get Simp, you know, you prevent somebody else having him, right? Because, you know, either he stays on FaZe and forms a pretty good team elsewhere. And yeah, Simp had a horrific time at the World Cup. It was, the World Championship, we'll see about the World Cup. Probably his worst event that he's ever played in his entire career. 0.6 in Search and Destroy, you're not going to see that every day, especially when they also got the opportunity to farm the Ravens, who were not good for the last couple of months at all. But, you know, this is an aberration, this is an anomaly, this is Simp's worst ever performance, and the next tournament you would expect him to be right back to where he's typically been. We'll see whether that happens or not. It probably will. It's Simp after all. He's in that conversation for a very good reason, and last year's World Cup was crucial to keeping this team together, but I'm not sure that's necessarily going to be the case this year. So this is what Shotzzy has to say about it. Says how when the conversation was brought up, he was open to the idea. Understandably for Shotzzy, he wasn't like super keen on making a move at this time, because Shotzi's whole career, certainly in his COD days, has been a bit of a mess really, in terms of the teams that he's been on. Not his individual level, but like they won the World Championship on Dallas Empire in 2020 and then immediately were forced to drop a player because it went back to 4v4. Then that 4v4 season on Dallas Empire was chaotic. Kremp was a very challenging teammate that year to our understanding. Huke got dropped, Vivid was in, FeLo came in. You know, it was all over the place that year, really, on Dallas. They still did pretty well. And then the merger happens. It becomes OpTic, right? Like, they go from Cold War into Vanguard. And yeah, the Vanguard season was good on some level. They won an event at the start of the year. But then they went through the Scump retirement arc. And then Scump kind of saying, well, maybe I'll play again and come back for an event or two. And then he retired anyway. The Dashy versus Rambo stuff, the illy thumb injury. Like, Shotzzy's been through it over the last few years. So many team changes, so much drama. And understandably, having finally put together that team with Kenny and Pred that actually worked, Shotzzy, and especially Dashy, was like, look, it works, right? We've found a combination that works. Can we please just, you know, stick with it and not switch it up after all the chaos of the last few years?
I was down to do it, but Brandon was like, no, we should stick.
He said invite.
Oh, well, that's too late. But I mean, I was down for both. I was open to both, but I was like, I was down for both. I mean, bro, chat, that situation's hard to think about. Like, bro, we literally won champs. We won champs. We won a major. Like, the team felt like that was like probably the first time where it actually felt like I don't know. That was like the first year that I've had that like we didn't make a fucking change. Like think about my entire career. Fucking my very first year, didn't make a change. You know, went successful. Second year, made like 2 roster changes. That was fucking annoying. After that was what? Vanguard. Injured thumb injury. Got Byron. Played with Jordan. MW2. Got Brandon. Dropped in there. Set their tires. MW3 was like the first year, or like I didn't have anything.
As the Warlord, Shotzzy open to the discussion, right? Because when players like that are on the market and Hex is down to do it, Shotzi's going to understandably say like, well, you know, look, we'll think about it. Dashy was not so keen, and I can understand it as well. In the same way that Shotzzy was going through hell for the last few years, so was Dashy. Finally gets his ring. You know, feels like him and Kenny are working well. Obviously, Pred and Shotzzy were bringing insane energy. There was lots of reasons why that team made a lot of sense. But also, you know, maybe you could have seen what happens this season coming to some degree. Often, Kenny and Shotzzy, we know they had some friction this season. Shotzzy talked about that at length on stream recently as well. That was maybe an inevitability at some point. So I understand why, in hindsight, getting Scrub and HyDra might have made sense. But of course, they won the World Championship this year anyway. The question then, I guess, does become, what would you do again? Because if Shotzzy was open to the change last year, or, you know, when he was considering Shotzzy and HyDra coming in, then this year, if Simp is available or if somebody else is available, it also raises the question too, as to whether you think about it. I do think one of the big considerations here with this whole OpTic Simp discussion is next year's game, Black Ops 7, what's it going to play like? How similar is it going to be to this year's game? The reality is you never really know, but it is a discussion it's a conversation that's worth having among the players, because if you're going to a very different style of game, if you're returning to a game that plays maybe a little bit more like Cold War, then yes, totally understand the argument to get Simp at any cost. But if next year's game is actually going to be very similar to this year's game in many respects, the movement, the way that it plays, the map design, hopefully not, but you know what I'm saying, right? If it's a direct sequel and it plays very similarly, then you know how valuable Huke was to the team this year, and it's difficult to argue that you can get much better than that. That's one of the points that you might say. This is it's an impossible question. Start, bench, or cut. Simp, Shotzzy, HyDra. Obviously, these are their numbers over their careers. You know, there isn't really any one correct answer to this. I think you could probably go literally any way on this, depending on what type of team you're trying to form and what game you're trying to form it for. But, you know, so that's a pretty challenging question. Thankfully, most teams don't have to worry about that type of stuff. But, Shotzzy, the Warlord, still maybe going to make some plays over the coming months, although maybe Hex is the real Warlord, as we've seen in recent months, but making the decision to make the change with Mercules when Shotzzy wasn't so keen. It's definitely causing an interesting debate in the community as to what happens next. So very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.
Shotzzy and HyDra. Biggest difference is, okay, as a main AR, I don't care who you are. How many people have played with both Shotzzy and HyDra? Has anyone else? I guess Clay has. Ghosty. So, see, Ghosty's tough because he's teaming with HyDra right now. See, in my opinion, HyDra is the better individual player. Shotzi's the way better team player. Shotzzy will make your job as a main AR so much fucking easier. Like, I remember in MW and Cold War, I thought I was really fucking good. And then immediately I no longer was teaming with Shotzzy. I'm like, damn, I'm not that fucking good. I'm not that good. Like, if you ask me, I think Shotzzy will help your team win more games. But HyDra will always look better statistically. Now, the weird shit is HyDra needs a really strong AR. So someone like Scrap, right? Like, when you're talking someone like Scrap and HyDra together, then that's like a crazy combination. Like, if I were to say Scrap and Shotzzy versus Scrap and HyDra, I'd probably take Scrap and HyDra, because Scrap doesn't necessarily need someone to fucking bounce around the map and be annoying, you know?